The ego trap. Alan Watts exposes your greatest illusion right now without even realizing it. You're living inside a trap. Not one made of steel or stone, but of thought of identity. It's invisible, yet it shapes every decision you make. It tells you who you are, what you should fear, and what you must strive for. This trap is the ego, and according to Alan Watts, it is not only the greatest illusion you'll ever face, but the very reason you feel lost, anxious, or disconnected. What if I told you that the person you think you are, the you defend, improve, and promote is not who you truly are? And what if breaking free from that illusion is the key to real freedom, joy, and peace? Alan Watts didn't speak about the ego the way most people do. He wasn't interested in shallow self-improvement or ego as arrogance. He meant something far more profound. He argued that the ego, the sense of being a separate I, an isolated mind inside a body, is not only false, it's the root of human suffering. And yet we cling to it. We build our lives around it. We protect it as if it were our soul. But it's not. It's a mask, a story, a fiction. And the more we believe in it, the more we suffer. The ego is the voice in your head that says, "This is me." It's the inner narrator constantly judging, labeling, comparing. It's the part of you that wants to be liked, to be right, to be important. It's the false center we create when we forget that we are not just in the universe, we are the universe, temporarily expressing itself in human form. Watts likened this to waves imagining they are separate from the ocean. The wave rises, it falls, but it is never not the ocean. Similarly, you rise and fall through experiences, identities, roles, but you are never not life itself. But here's where it gets tricky. The ego isn't evil. It's not your enemy. It's a tool, a necessary function for navigating the world. The problem arises when we start to believe that the tool is the master. When we forget that the ego is a map, not the territory. We begin to mistake our thoughts for truth, our emotions for evidence, and our identity for our essence. And in that confusion, we become trapped, caught in a loop of self-doubt, comparison, and endless striving. We chase things not because they fulfill us, but because they validate the story of who we think we are.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Have you ever wondered why, no matter how much you accomplish, it never feels quite enough? Why success feels hollow, or why failure feels like death? It's because both are measured against the ego's fragile identity. The ego thrives on separation, me versus you, success versus failure, right versus wrong. It needs conflict, superiority, and control to survive. But the truth is, none of those things are real in the way we think they are. They're constructs, mental projections, they. And once you see that, everything starts to shift. Watts would often ask, who are you really? Not your name, your job, or your personality, but the awareness beneath it, the watcher of thoughts, the space in which all your experiences arise. That's the real you, and it has no need to prove itself, because it's already whole, already free. The ego, on the other hand, is always hungry, always searching for something to grasp onto, a new identity, a new achievement, a new enemy. It can't rest because it's built on the illusion of incompleteness. But you are not incomplete. You are not the mask. You are the one wearing it. So here's a question that might shake something loose. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to defend your ego and started living from your true self? What would change if you didn't need to be someone in order to be enough? That's the beginning of liberation. Not the kind of freedom the world sells you: more money, more power, more status, but the kind of freedom that comes from no longer needing any of that to feel alive. The ego trap is subtle. It disguises itself as ambition, as morality, as self-discipline. It tells you that you're on a noble path while keeping you stuck in the same patterns of fear and control. But Watts didn't suggest we kill the ego. He suggested we see through it. And that seeing clear, honest, fearless is what begins to loosen the grip. It's what allows you to laugh at yourself, to forgive yourself, to stop taking everything so seriously. Because when you realize you're not the puppet, but the hand inside it, everything changes. And maybe that's the point. Not to escape the ego, but to stop mistaking it for who we are, and to play the game of life fully, but without forgetting that it's a game. And to dance with the ego, not be ruled by it. To remember, again and again, that you are not the wave, you are the ocean, playing as a wave for a little while. The lie of separation, why you're not who you think you are. If there's one illusion that props up the ego more than any other, it's the illusion of separation. It's the belief that I am over here and you are over there, that I exist as an isolated self moving through a world of others. It's so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we never even question it. We treat it as obvious, even natural. But Alan Watts challenged this assumption at its core. He insisted that the idea of a separate self is not only false, it's the root of our loneliness, our fear, and our endless search for meaning. Because once you believe you're alone in a cold, indifferent universe, then everything becomes a problem you have to solve. Every connection you seek, every success you chase, becomes an attempt to bridge a gap that was never real to begin with. The truth is, you are not separate. You never were. You're not a mind trapped inside a body, floating through a foreign world. You're the world, experiencing itself from a particular point of view. Just like the eyes are not separate from the face, or the waves from the sea, you are not separate from the whole. Watts would often say, you didn't come into this world, you came out of it. That one sentence flips everything on its head. Because if you didn't arrive into the world, but rather from it, then you are not a stranger here. You belong. You are this universe, looking back at itself through human eyes. But why don't we feel that way? Why does the illusion of separation feel so real? It's because we mistake the map for the territory. Language, thought, identity, they divide the world into categories so we can make sense of it. But the categories are not the reality. They're tools, not truths. When we name a tree, we reduce it to a concept. When we say I and you, we carve the world into pieces. But in the actual experience, before the thought, before the label, everything is connected. Everything is one continuous, flowing whole. The mind cuts reality into parts, but life itself cannot be divided. And the moment you start to see this, the moment you feel this, something begins to dissolve inside you. The defensive walls of the ego start to crumble. You no longer need to prove yourself because you realize there is no self to prove. You no longer need to win because there is no one to compete against. You stop fearing death because you understand you were never truly born as a separate thing in the first place. You were and always will be the unfolding of life itself. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's the key to peace. Think about how much of your anxiety comes from trying to maintain the illusion of being someone valuable, someone successful, someone lovable. But those goals only make sense if you believe you're separate, if you believe there's a fragile little you that needs to be protected and enhanced. But what if that you is a story, a habit of thought? What if the real you, the awareness beneath the story, needs nothing added to it at all? Watts used the metaphor of the mirror a lot. He said we're like mirrors with dust on them. The dust is the ego, the identity, the beliefs, the fears. But underneath the dust, the mirror is already perfect. It doesn't need to be improved. It only needs to be seen. When we stop adding to ourselves, stop seeking, striving, struggling, we begin to uncover the clarity that was always there. We begin to remember who we are, not as a thought, but as a living reality. And here's where it gets even more beautiful. When you realize your oneness with everything, your relationship to others transforms. You stop seeing people as competitors or threats, but you stop judging them so harshly. Why? Because you recognize yourself in them. Their pain is your pain. Their joy is your joy. Compassion becomes natural, not forced. Love becomes effortless. And in that space, true connection is born not between two egos, but between expressions of the same source. So ask yourself honestly, what would it feel like to live without the need to be someone? What would it feel like to drop the mask, the persona, the constant self-definition and just be? That's not giving up. That's waking up. That's stepping out of the lie of separation and into the truth of unity. And when you do, life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes real. And that's more than enough. The endless chase, why you'll never find yourself out there, there's a haunting pattern that most of us live without realizing it, the chase. We chase success, love, approval, experiences, enlightenment, even happiness itself. We chase because we feel that something is missing. We feel incomplete, as if there's a hole inside of us that needs to be filled. And the world, through its advertising, culture, and conditioning, promises that fulfillment lies just around the corner if only we work harder, think smarter, look better, achieve more, meditate longer, or finally get it right. But as Alan Watts so clearly saw, the chase itself is the illusion. The moment you believe that what you are seeking is out there, you've already abandoned the truth of what you are. Watts described this as the game of hide and seek that consciousness plays with itself. We forget who we are on purpose, just so we can rediscover it again. But somewhere along the way, we take the forgetting too seriously. We start believing that the search is real, that there's a version of ourselves to be found in the next relationship, the next breakthrough, the next paycheck or spiritual high or social media milestone. But no matter how far you run, no matter how many mountains you climb, you never really arrive. Because the you you're trying to find is the one who's been doing the looking the whole time. Imagine trying to bite your own teeth. That's what the ego does when it tries to find itself. It creates an image, a concept, a goal, and then chases it endlessly, believing that once it's caught, the emptiness will disappear. But what if the emptiness isn't a flaw? What if it's not something to escape, but something to understand? Watts reminds us that the void we fear is not the absence of self, it's the absence of illusion. And when we stop running from that, when we stop trying to patch it up with distractions and identities, we come face to face with something extraordinary: silence, stillness, and the raw presence of being. This is where most people panic, Because without the chase, without the next thing to strive for, we feel naked, vulnerable, undefended. But that moment right there is the doorway. It's the space where the ego dissolves and something deeper shines through. Not a better version of you, not a more spiritual or successful or enlightened person, but the awareness that was always there before the story began. And that awareness doesn't need to accomplish anything to be enough. It doesn't need to become anything to be whole. So why do we keep chasing? Because we're afraid of what we'll find if we stop. We're afraid that without the struggle, without the identity, there will be nothing. But what flips that fear on its head? What if the nothing you're afraid of is the very thing that sets you free? What if letting go of the chase is not the end of meaning, but the beginning of real life? Ask yourself this: what are you still chasing, and why? What would happen if you stopped and turned inward, not to fix yourself, but to meet yourself? Could it be that the very stillness you've been avoiding contains the peace you've been seeking? The final illusion, how seeing through the ego frees you from suffering the final illusion, is not just that you are the ego, it's that the ego can ever be satisfied. It's an endless loop, a self-perpetuating machine that feeds on craving, fear, and comparison. It tells you just one more thing, just one more success, just one more transformation, then you'll be whole. But no matter what you achieve, the goalpost shifts. The ego doesn't want peace. It wants survival. It wants to remain relevant. And the only way it knows how to do that is by keeping you chasing, doubting, comparing, and striving. That's why awakening isn't about fixing the ego. It's about seeing through it. It's about realizing beyond all thought that the one watching the game doesn't need to play it. Alan Watts didn't suggest we destroy the ego, but he never said to make war against it. In fact, fighting the ego is just another move within the ego's game. The trick is not to resist it, but to recognize it as a character or role you've been playing. And the moment you see that, with full clarity, the spell begins to break. You detach not with force, but with understanding. You realize that the ego was never you. It was just a costume, a lens, a dream figure. And what you really are has been silently watching the whole time. That awareness, the watcher, the witness, is not separate from life. It is life. It doesn't need to be improved or upgraded. It simply is. When you rest in that space, when you live from that stillness, suffering doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip. Pain still happens. Loss still comes. But without the ego's narrative, suffering no longer defines you. You stop saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and start seeing, "This is what's happening now, what will I do with it?" That subtle shift is the beginning of real freedom. Here's the paradox. The more you let go of trying to be someone, the more your true self begins to shine. Not as a fixed identity, but as a fluid, creative, alive presence. You become more loving, more open, more spontaneous, not because you're following rules, but because you're no longer bound by fear. You stop needing to control how others see you because you aren't clinging to the image. You stop needing to control life because you realize you are life. So let me leave you with this. If you could drop every idea of who you think you are, every label, every story, every role, what would remain? Who would you be without memory, without ambition, without needing to be anything at all? That's the space Alan Watts pointed to. That's the freedom beyond the ego. Not a new identity, but the end of needing one. Not an escape from life, but a falling back into it fully, honestly, awake. Not someone becoming something, but life simply being itself through you. And once you taste that, even for a moment, you'll know you were never trapped. You were never broken. You only believed a story. And now, you're free.